The sharp crack of a gavel split the silence like thunder. "Order in the court!" Judge Anthony Trenga's voice boomed through the grand federal courtroom, his words reverberating against polished mahogany walls. The room was packed. Law students squeezed shoulder to shoulder on the gallery benches. Reporters leaned forward with pens poised, and attorneys sat stiffly, sensing that this was not going to be an ordinary hearing. All eyes turned toward the confrontation at center stage. A seasoned federal judge with decades of power behind his robe, and a Congresswoman, Jasmine Crockett, standing at the plaintiff's table, her navy blue suit immaculate, her posture unflinching. Judge Trenga's face was flushed with irritation. He jabbed a finger toward Crockett, each word dripping with disdain. "I will not tolerate theatrics in my courtroom, Congresswoman." His tone was sharp, almost mocking, as if the very idea of her introducing new evidence was an insult to his authority. For nearly 10 minutes he addressed her down, lecturing her about proper procedure, reminding her that his courtroom was not a stage for political drama. The gallery shifted uneasily. This was no ordinary scolding. It was a public humiliation, rare and unsettling, directed at a sitting member of Congress who also happened to be a former civil rights attorney. The tension was electric. One law student whispered to another, "He's trying to break her." A reporter's pen stopped mid-sentence, realizing this moment would lead tomorrow's headlines. Even veteran attorneys, who had seen their share of heated exchanges, glanced at one another with raised brows. The sheer hostility of the judge's tone was shocking. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. Instead, she calmly opened a leather portfolio on the podium in front of her. The faintest trace of a smile crossed her lips, an expression not of arrogance, but one who knew she held something far more powerful than the judge's gavel. Slowly, deliberately, she adjusted her notes. The gallery leaned forward, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. And that's where everything began to change. Because what Congresswoman Crockett was about to reveal would not only shift the balance of this civil rights case, but it would shake the very foundations of the federal judiciary. Hidden within that portfolio were documents no one expected, evidence that would expose not just corporate misconduct, but raise serious questions about Judge Trenga himself. If you think this is just another courtroom drama, think again. What you're about to hear is a story of courage against authority, of truth breaking through walls of power, and of one woman who stood her ground when the odds were stacked against her. And before we dive into the twists and turns that left legal experts speechless, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below about what you'd do if you were in Crockett's shoes. Because trust me, this is just the beginning, and you won't want to miss what comes next. To truly understand why this courtroom clash became one of the most talked about moments in modern legal history, you first need to know who Judge Anthony Trenga is. At 71 years old, Trenga was no rookie on the bench. Appointed in 2008 by President George W. Bush, he carried with him a Georgetown law degree, years of experience at one of Virginia's most prestigious law firms, and a reputation for running a courtroom with an iron fist. Over the years, Trenga had presided over numerous high-profile cases, particularly in the realm of national security. His rulings often made headlines, painting him as a judge who valued strict order, meticulous procedure, and a no-nonsense approach to advocacy. To many in the legal community, he was seen as a traditionalist, someone who believed rules existed to be followed to the letter, no matter the circumstances. But beneath that surface of respectability, whispers often circulated about his ties to corporate and conservative legal circles. He frequently spoke at business-oriented conferences, attended events sponsored by influential legal organizations, and was known to keep close connections with Virginia's business elite. For some observers, this raised questions about whether his courtroom decisions always aligned perfectly with the ideal of blind justice. This particular civil rights case put him under a brighter spotlight than usual. The plaintiffs, minority employees of a major corporation, claimed systematic discrimination in hiring, promotions, and workplace treatment. The evidence they had managed to submit was already damaging, surviving repeated efforts by the defense to get the case dismissed. But Trenga had grown increasingly skeptical. He limited what the plaintiffs could present, restricted witnesses, and dismissed motions with language that hinted, at least to some, at bias. So when Jasmine Crockett rose to argue for newly discovered evidence, Trenga was already irritated. To him, it wasn't just about procedure. It was about maintaining control in a courtroom where he saw himself as the ultimate authority.
His scolding of Crockett wasn't only about the rules. It was a performance meant to reassert dominance. Yet what Trenga didn't anticipate was that this wasn't just another attorney fumbling with late evidence. This was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, an attorney with a career built on dismantling systemic injustice, a woman who had sparred with some of the toughest corporate defense teams in the country, and unlike many who wilted under his glares and sharp words, Crockett was about to prove she wasn't intimidated. The gallery might have thought they were watching a judge exert power over a politician, but in truth, they were about to witness a confrontation that would turn the tables entirely. And as Crockett prepared to deliver her first counterpunch, the balance of authority in that courtroom began to shift.
Jasmine Crockett wasn't new to the pressure of high-stakes battles. Before ever stepping foot in Congress, she had spent over 15 years in courtrooms, representing clients whose civil rights were routinely dismissed, ignored, or outright violated. A graduate of the University of Houston Law Center, Crockett made a name for herself as a fearless advocate, someone who prepared meticulously, fought relentlessly, and caught her opponents off guard with innovative strategies. That morning, standing in a packed federal courtroom, she brought every ounce of that experience to the table. When Trenga questioned her, interrupted her, even mocked her, she didn't stumble, she didn't raise her voice. She simply met him point for point, citing case law, federal rules, and precedents with such ease it was clear she knew the ground she was standing on better than anyone in the room. "You may be out of your depth in federal procedure, Congresswoman," Trenga remarked at one point, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The gallery murmured. An attack that blatant from a judge to a member of Congress was rarely seen in public. But Crockett only straightened her shoulders. "With respect, Your Honor," she said, her tone measured and calm. "Before serving in Congress, I litigated over 100 federal cases, including appeals in the Fifth Circuit. I am intimately familiar with these rules." Her words hung in the air like a blade. The room went silent. Even Trenga seemed taken aback by her unshaken poise. Then she delivered a masterstroke. Reaching into her portfolio, she pulled out a ruling, one Trenga himself had authored just the previous year. Reading aloud from his own words, she reminded him of how he had once defined the very standard he was now claiming did not apply. His own precedent turned against him. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat. In that moment, the dynamic in the courtroom shifted. It was no longer a lecture from the bench to an attorney. It was a duel between equals. And Crockett had just landed the first decisive blow. The law students in the back scribbled furiously. Reporters whispered to each other, recognizing this wasn't just legal sparring, it was history in the making. Crockett wasn't just defending her clients. She was exposing the cracks in a system where power too often shielded itself from scrutiny. But this was only the beginning, because as commanding as her legal mastery was, it was the evidence she carried, the documents hidden in that leather portfolio, that would soon send shockwaves far beyond that courtroom. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Crockett pulled out a second folder. Inside were documents the defense had deliberately concealed. Emails proving the corporation had withheld evidence, memos showing patterns of discrimination across multiple states, and, most damning of all, communications that tied Judge Trenga himself to the corporation's interests. As she handed the first stack of emails to the bench, the judge's expression darkened. "This is troubling," he muttered, his voice lower now, less assured. Still, he tried to cling to procedure, insisting that deadlines had passed. But Crockett was ready. She cited Rule 60b-2, explaining how the law specifically allowed reconsideration when new evidence was deliberately withheld. The gallery leaned in, barely breathing. Then came the memo, the one that changed everything. Written by the corporation's HR director, it revealed a strategy to bury complaints across multiple states to avoid creating a paper trail of national discrimination. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one group of plaintiffs in Virginia. It was about a nationwide pattern. Trenga looked uneasy. He asked where the memo had come from.
Crockett didn't hesitate. "A whistleblower, Your Honor." And that whistleblower revealed something else. From her final folder, she produced an email exchange between the corporation's executives and their lead attorneys. The words were chilling. "Judge Trenga has been a reliable ally since his appointment. His former law firm still represents our subsidiaries, and his investments in our parent company give us confidence he will rule to exclude cross-stake evidence." The courtroom froze. Gasps echoed. A federal judge, compromised by financial interests? Defense attorneys leapt to their feet, shouting objections. Trenga slammed his gavel, his hands trembling. Order in the court! But it was too late. The truth was out. Crockett had unveiled the kind of evidence that didn't just win cases, it destroyed careers. And in that moment, everyone in the room knew Judge Trenga's authority had collapsed.
The recess that followed felt like an eternity. When Judge Trenga returned, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Chief Judge Rebecca Hollis, a jurist known for her unwavering ethics. With his voice subdued, Trenga announced his recusal from the case. Hollis immediately granted Crockett's motion and ordered a review of every ruling Trenga had made. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, headlines screamed of judicial misconduct, hidden conflicts, and a Congresswoman who had exposed it all. Legal experts across the spectrum weighed in. Some called it the most significant moment for judicial ethics in decades. Others said Crockett's courage would inspire reforms for years to come. And reforms did come. Within months, Congress introduced new legislation requiring stricter judicial financial disclosures. Law schools began teaching the Crockett confrontation as a case study in ethics. The corporation, faced with overwhelming evidence, settled for $175 million and pledged systemic reforms. For Jasmine Crockett, the impact was profound. No longer just another Congresswoman, she became a national symbol of courage, proof that preparation, integrity, and moral conviction could challenge even the highest authority. For Judge Trenga, the end came swiftly. Facing investigations into dozens of undisclosed conflicts, he retired in disgrace, admitting to errors in judgment that shook public trust. But perhaps the most powerful legacy was the inspiration it sparked. Young attorneys, students, and ordinary Americans saw in Crockett's stand a rare glimpse of accountability in a system too often shielded by privilege. She showed that the law, when wielded with courage, could still be the great equalizer. And as one law student who witnessed it wrote in a viral essay, justice isn't just about statutes and rulings. It's about the courage to speak truth to power, no matter how intimidating that power may seem.